Hello, hi everyone. My name is Shaniqua Staples, and I want to thank you for coming to today's Talks at Google. I am one of the team leads in trust and safety here at YouTube and Google, and I am happy to have Dr. Shairi Turner here as our guest, and she is going to talk on the topic of It's Okay to Not Be Okay as part of our Black History Month series.
Thank you, Shaniqua. Thank you, Google, for inviting me. I'm excited and proud and pleased to be here.
Thank you. I really appreciate you coming on. I know I talked to you about this, and I was just so excited when you agreed to come on. So it's been a while, well, like 5 months while.
Right. Right.
So I used to work with Dr. Turner at Crisis Text Line. I was there in multiple roles, but my last role there was Director of Student Learning. And during that time, Dr. Turner, I came back to Crisis Text Line as the Chief Transformation Officer. So I just want to give a little background about Dr. Turner because she's done so much great, amazing work. So currently, Dr. Turner is the Chief Transformation Officer for Crisis Text Line, a nonprofit volunteer support organization that delivers crisis intervention using a tech platform. She's also a Stanford graduate and a Harvard-trained pediatrician with a master's in public health from Harvard. So one of the great things about Dr. Turner as well is she was one of the first chief medical directors for the Florida Department of Juvenile Justice. So during that time, she held multiple positions, and she's also was the COO of Crisis Text Line as well. So Dr. Turner, I'm going to let you talk a little bit more about that journey from basically Department of Justice to Crisis Text Line.
Right. It was a journey. I started my career as a physician, just wanting to work with underserved people. So to be just a physician, an internist and pediatrician in a clinic, but really became very interested in both population health when I got my master's of public health, and also incarcerated populations. I had done a fellowship where I was working with the Department of Youth Services in Massachusetts, looking at substance abuse amongst my minority youth. And it was after that point where I had the opportunity to become the first chief medical director for the Florida Department of Juvenile Justice, for several reasons. One, I had a cousin who was impacted by childhood trauma. And as is the case with many young African-American men, wound up incarcerated or he took his own life. And so that was an experience that was very impactful. And when I had the opportunity to work with all of these children who were in the Department of Juvenile Justice in Florida and have an impact, it was something I could not pass up. After that time there, we focused on trauma. We focused quite a bit on the recognition and the connection between childhood experiences and what brought kids into the Department of Juvenile Justice. And then I worked at the Department of Health, continuing to focus on trauma and physical health conditions, and then did some consulting and wound up at Crisis Text Line back in 2017 as the chief medical officer.
Awesome. So it sounds like personal trauma that you went through in your family really kind of directed you and guided you to your career choice and decision. I know you talked a little bit about in regards to the male population, especially African-American men, and how you saw a lot of the mental health kind of relating to incarceration. With the work that you were doing at the Justice Department, did you see a decrease in being able to provide that mental health assistance to those individuals?
So at that point, we had just introduced the concept and the connection between trauma and mental health. So what we were seeing was a lot of young boys, African-American boys, girls, Black and brown, who had diagnoses of oppositional defiant disorder, or ADHD, attention deficit disorder, or behavioral disorders, antisocial personality disorders, when in fact they had significant trauma histories. And when I speak about trauma, it's physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, neglect that impacts children, both their development and their behavior throughout. So it was a real opportunity there to be able to impact those children's lives.
Awesome. So that was, what type of transition was that for you? Because you went from doing like that in-person care, and then like you said, you did different consulting work, you did training, and then crisis text line, right? So everything went from that in-person kind of experience with helping individuals with trauma to basically leading different teams on a virtual platform and still dealing with trauma and crisis intervention.
Yeah, so it's very different. I had not practiced clinically at that point for several years, but to be able to impact thousands of people who were in crisis, reaching out by text, again, attracted the public health side of me. So the large population care, to deliver compassion and empathy and crisis intervention services with volunteers supervised by mental health professionals at that scale had not been done before. I mean, this was a national organization delivering crisis intervention to people who may not otherwise have had access. So it was a phenomenal opportunity to bring together my experience with trauma, my love of public health, along with just all of the leadership experience that I had had up until that point.
Yes, and I can definitely, being one of those mental health professionals under you at that time, I can say that you came with a wealth of knowledge and change. And that goes into what you're doing now, transformation. But going back to when you were the chief medical officer, I think what you brought to the organization was a different perspective, that clinical perspective from a mental health perspective. Because yes, Crisis Text Line does a lot with technology, but also it's a mental health organization as well. And I think you having the ability to kind of put that on the front lines and letting everyone know, like, hey, we also deal with mental health and this is how we're doing it. I really think that brought a big impact on how you shaped the different teams within the organization.
Thank you. Yes. So as a startup organization, that came through that venture capital pipeline, that social entrepreneurship, we are infused with data, technology, product development. That is what makes us unique. That is what makes us able to meet the needs of our textures with agility. But it's a mental health organization. It's a crisis support organization that is infused and led and driven by the data, the products, and the technology that we have in-house.
Yes. And I don't think a lot of people, and I talk so fast, a lot of people may have not caught that, but, with you being the first chief medical officer for Crisis Text Line and now the chief transformation officer, you held two executive roles within one organization. As an African-American woman holding two powerful roles, what does that mean to you?
Oh, it's tremendous. Something that I don't take for granted. Right. Understanding that to much whom is given, much is expected. And to be able to guide first the clinical side of Crisis Text Line, and to now be in a position that I'm just honored to have been asked to come back as the Chief Transformation Officer, where I am able to help lead the organization through a cultural transformation, where we are focused on bringing equity to the center of everything that we do, so that not only are we diverse, because we have quite a diverse staff, but our focus is on being inclusive, making sure that everyone's voice is heard, making sure that we are equitable in all aspects of what we do as an organization, because we feel like that makes us better. Our textures are diverse, our volunteers are diverse. We have to have that cultural competency and that cultural knowledge and awareness.
Yeah, and I can only imagine, and Dr. Turner, you can let me know more about this. That could not have been an easy task, coming in as an organization kind of restructures itself and really putting that inclusive mindset in the front. How was that transition for you?
So it was big, but when I looked back on some of the other opportunities that I had, both at the Department of Juvenile Justice and the Department of Health, there was a theme of transformation that went through there, where bringing an awareness of medical, mental health, girls' issues to a fairly solidly correctional minded agency, very large agency, was a bit of a transformation. Bringing trauma there was a bit of a transformation. And while I was at the Department of Health, we had just a legislatively mandated set of cutbacks and restructuring and reorganization. So I wasn't new to reorganization or transformation. I am one who enjoys going to new spaces and new places and learning, working with people, learning about the people, and seeing how I can lend an eye of systems and structure and change. I feel like that's one of my gifts. So to do that for an organization that has such an impact on thousands of people nationally and internationally it's an honor. And every day I wake up excited to see how we can do this and how we can do it better.
Awesome. Now, in some of my research and digging on you, I'm not stalking you, but I had to get some research. I recently learned that Crisis Text Line received a $2 million grant from Google.org to kind of support the coaching and mentorship support from skilled Googler volunteers as part of the Google AI Impact Challenge. And from my understanding through this project, Crisis Text Line use a lot of natural language processing and data on counselor capacity. So I just want to know, in regards to these innovations as critical steps in helping organizations like Crisis Text Line, how has this support been able to improve some of the techniques of Crisis Text Line?
Yes. So first of all, big thank you to Google, because it is what it allows us to continue to do is to be a free and accessible source of crisis intervention and mental health support for people who would not otherwise have this. So we know through our post-conversation surveys that we over-index for people of color. We over-index for Native American and Indigenous people. So where otherwise either people don't have access to mental health services or there's a stigma around reaching out for that kind of help, people can do so now confidentially. So our ability to continue to provide that service for free enhances that access so that we can expand, so we can grow, so we can become global. But it also allows us to continue to develop the very unique technology that we have to make us ever able to be more responsive, faster in our responses so that we can deliver that empathy and compassion and support to more people efficiently and effectively. And we could not do that without our philanthropic partners, right? So if we had to charge for these services, it would mean we're not able to expand and be as agile as we are.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good aspect, is the fact that Crisis Text Line, the services internationally, are free services for anyone in need 24/7. So I think that speaks volume to the work that the organization's doing, and also the work that you're doing to ensure that the environment for staff, volunteers, and for the individuals texting in is an exclusive environment. So I want to go ahead and kind of shift the conversation a little bit, because one of the things that we realize, especially at Crisis Text Line, is that a lot of times you do have these mental health professionals who are talking with these individuals, who are assisting the volunteers. And is that vicarious trauma. I was fortunate enough to be in one of your trainings when you talked about this. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more to our audience about what vicarious trauma is.
Yes. I think first what I'd like to do is just make sure everybody's on the same page around what trauma is, right? So trauma is an event that affects us either psychologically or physically. And you can have three types of trauma. You can have like an acute trauma where someone's in a car accident and just the psychological effects around that. You can have a chronic trauma. And when we think about that, we're talking more about like child abuse or sexual abuse, or more of a long-standing, long-term, especially during childhood type trauma. And then there's complex trauma, which is the layering of traumas on top of each other. So for instance, childhood sexual abuse, physical abuse or assault as an adult, and then some community trauma. So it's like the impact is greater when it's layered like that, especially. And then when we think of vicarious trauma, it's in the formal sense, it's like for our crisis supervisors, we're very mindful because it's the hearing, it's the experiencing of other people's traumas, right? That leaves kind of an emotional residue, an exposure to that, even if you've not experienced the trauma itself. And what we have to be mindful of is that trauma is so prevalent, especially childhood trauma, that trauma in the workplace, just the experience and helping others through their own trauma, can create this vicarious experience where clinicians or people who work with those who are in crisis find themselves, if they're not mindful of it, depressed or irritated or angry, or, basically taking on some of the symptoms and experiences of those that they have been trying to help.
Awesome. And I also want to remind the audience, please, if you have any questions, please drop them in the live chat. We are more than happy to answer any and all questions. I know, Dr. Turner, we were just talking about the different forms of trauma, right? And I wanted to know, as we talked more about the workplace trauma, as African Americans, we went through a lot of historical trauma. Do you think that plays a role in how African Americans respond to trauma now?
I do. I think we can look at it from several lenses. So just the prevalence of trauma within all communities, right? So as African Americans, we too have childhood trauma, right? Then we also carry the trauma of, our racialized experience here in the United States. We carry the historical trauma of slavery and the stories of slavery and the experiences. And then we also, that's overlaid with just the day-to-day trauma. So either microaggressions or macroaggressions in the workplace or the community, but also the visualization of situations of police brutality, right? Where George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, we can dig as far back as you can think, right? Back, Rodney King, right? So Rodney King being a sentinel moment in the history of African Americans because it was videotaped, it was recorded. That to see over and over again layers, right? We talked about complex trauma. It layers upon existing trauma for African Americans, people of color. And I think about this often now for our children who are continuously through social media exposed to and imbibing these videotapes into their, their developing brain. When will that be retrieved, right? But I think back to your question, for African Americans, our trauma is complex, it's layered, it's historical, it reverberates, right? And it's carrying those things inside of us where we don't always know when and where the trigger will occur that brings some of those experiences to the forefront and creates an increased reaction that might not be quite at the level of the situation because it's drawing from previous experiences.
No, yeah, I agree 100%. I think with everything that's going on and just thinking about past situations and past that we weren't even here for, all that layered on top of one another, it just builds this tense, I feel, inside of us as African Americans, where sometimes we don't even consciously know that we have. But
Mhm.
when things happen and that trigger, is let go, it's just like all this anger and frustration and like you said, with social media and the younger generations, it's just like this endless cycle. So with today's topic being it's okay to not be okay, what does that mean to you?
Really, to me, it's be accepting of where you are. Wherever you find yourself, be there. Meet yourself there with compassion. Um, Whatever physical, emotional, or mental state you're in, be accepting of that, right? So currently we have pandemic, we have racial and equity reckoning nationally, we have political upheaval, people are struggling financially. So to say it's okay to not be okay just means if you're not feeling right, like accept that for yourself, seek help, right? So either through your own coping strategies or through professional help or crisis text line or other hotlines. um, Recognize that today in this moment, if you're not feeling like yourself, don't judge, right? Don't judge yourself because of that.
And I think it's hard though to give ourselves space and grace to not be okay. You brought up some really good resources and coping skills, but I think a lot of times mental health is still a stigma in African American communities. So to not feel okay means, for some that you're weak, you're not strong. What's wrong with you? Pick yourself up by the bootstraps. So it's so many different, layers to what does it really mean to not be okay. So when you have individuals who have not still accepted that there is help or that it's okay to get help, what kind of advice could you give to them if they're still suffocating from all the trauma?
Right. It's give yourself permission, right? So if it means that you go privately somewhere or you reach out to some service like crisis text line where you're anonymous, right? You're still getting the help. Or you work on your own toolbox. So figuring out what causes your own stress, right? Remove yourself from that stressor if you can, but recognize when your body is going into a stress response. So what happens? Is it your heart rate increases, your breathing increases? I know my neck kind of gets hot, right? And that's your body saying, I want to fight or run, fight, flight, or freeze. Your body is saying this situation is not good for me. So being able to remove yourself from that situation or reach into your toolbox of whatever the coping strategy is, right? So if it's exercise, if it's meditation, it's very unique to individuals. But whatever it is, get it out, right? So the worst thing we can do to ourselves when we're stressed is to try to suppress it, right? So that's when oftentimes people turn to drugs and alcohol to make those feelings go away, but it's really just suppressing them and pushing them deeper instead of exploring the ways to get them out. Right. I think it's really important for us to recognize that you don't have to be in a full-blown mental health crisis to work with a therapist, right? You can be down, you can be unhappy, not yourself, not interested in your usual activities, to take a pause and step back and say something's going on here, right? The pandemic, politics, what have you, are all affecting me and my mental health. And I think I need to talk to somebody. And it's okay to talk to someone, and it's okay for that person to not be a family member or a friend, because oftentimes that keeps the distance so that you can feel comfortable being vulnerable where you wouldn't necessarily always feel that way with someone you know.
Yeah, I tell everyone used to say, Shaniqua, you talk so much. Yes, because I'm not keeping this stuff in. I'm not going to die of stress for nobody. You're going to hear it all.
Right.
I want to go back to that mental health toolkit. That I think that's something I stole from you actually when I started working with moms, African American moms going through postpartum. I used to always touch on, just pull out your mental health toolkit, and I still use to this day. Can you explain more what that toolkit is?
Right. So it's hypothetical, but it can also be real. When I was working in the Department of Juvenile Justice, some of the residential programs had basically like a rolling cart with different drawers, and in those drawers were squeeze balls, soft cloths, those little massage balls, basically tactile things that the kids could go to when they felt stressed, right? So that was the toolkit. Or you can sit in the rocking chair in the dark, or you can listen to music, or you can talk to someone. But your toolkit is individualized. It's what do you do when you pause, when you recognize you're feeling stressed, you recognize that whatever's going on outside of your body is affecting your inner health, your inner mental and physical health, because they are connected. And you need to take that moment to find whatever it is will calm you down. And my suggestion really is to figure out what your toolkit is when you're not in the moment of being fully stressed, right? So think about it, have it ready. If it's a person, let that person know, when I call you, it means that I'm really not in a good place, right? Or your toolkit is plugging 741 into your phone, right? Because then I'm in crisis. I can text crisis text line. So the toolkit is really about knowing your stressors, knowing the response, the physical response that you're going to have to those stressors as a touch point to say, all right, I need to go find my toolkit. I need to go do what makes me feel calm and relaxed.
Awesome. I hope everyone got that, because I will say that I can speak testament to the mental health toolkit. It's helped in so many situations. And Dr. Turner, you made a good point that you don't have to be full-blown mental health crisis to seek help or to pull out that toolkit. And it is a really good idea. Just go ahead and build that toolkit when you're not in that crisis or in that situation. I have gospel trap music. We can talk about that later, but it calms me down. So it's okay definitely to have that mental health toolkit.
Yeah.
One of the things that I know, not just with political and racial injustice, it's a pandemic. How can people, when a lot of let's say they already had this mental health toolkit, they already had what they needed to kind of get through these stressors, but yet now they are just locked down. They can't go anywhere. They may be in family situations where they're locked in with their abuser. What are some things that they can do to feel okay, or feel it's okay to not be okay?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I wish I had the magic answer for that, because the pandemic has created home situations for spouses, partners, and children that put them in an unsafe space, where schools or workplaces were other locations where they could go to have a break. So it's not an easy answer. And I think it's why we're seeing such an increase in mental health crises during the pandemic. The isolation on top of some family dynamics that could be bad to start with and worsened by financial issues, et cetera. So really, it's a level up toolkit. It's a safe, sometimes it may mean exploring a safe place away from home, and that's hard too. But if your physical safety is at risk, then, going to a shelter might be the only option despite COVID. But it's about your physical safety at that point. Again, knowing what services are available, crisis intervention services that you can access from your home by phone privately. and leaning into those.
Thank you for that. Yeah, it's never, you're never stuck in a situation. And it's okay. Again, it's okay to not be okay, but it's also okay to seek help. You never have to go through anything alone. I really appreciate you saying that, Dr. Turner. So for Google's Black History theme this year is Still I Rise. And I wanted to share a part of Maya Angelou's poem that really stuck out for me. Out the huts of history's shame, I rise up. From a past that's rooted in pain, I rise. What are your thoughts on this particular part of the poem? And how does it relate to the trauma African Americans carry with them daily?
We love Maya Angelou. She's just, she always had her finger on the pulse of the human experience. But to me, to your question, it says we as people are resilient, right? So we have withstood the Middle Passage stolen from Africa, right? We've withstood structural historic racism that's been infused and embedded to keep us oppressed. We've withstood lynchings and beatings and the erasure of our contributions to history, but we still rise to meet the needs of the day. We rise to meet the needs of our family. We rise to meet the needs of our country, of our democracy. We still believe, we still hope, we still bring it. Like we bring the glory, we bring the culture, we still bring it as a people despite all of that. And our ability to do so just speaks to our tremendous resilience.
Yeah.
Great poem.
Yeah, I agree. It is a great poem. And I also look at it as, it's okay to be tired.
Yes.
And I think a lot of times, like you said before, is giving yourself permission. We say, we rise and are risen, but it's okay to be tired. I mean, it was a long journey. It's a long journey. And adding on other situations just make it even longer. But give yourself grace in that piece to be able to say, I did it, being able to congratulate yourself as you rise. So thank you so much for sharing that. What are some practical steps that we all can take to rise within trauma or from trauma?
So one of the things to being resilient is like you said, recognizing when you have to care for yourself, right? Self-care is somewhat, becoming somewhat of a cliche, but it's real. It's like knowing, it's part of that toolkit. It's right. It's like knowing what you need so you can be resilient, right? And part of that resilience is knowing when you need to take to the bed for a day, right? Knowing when you need rest, you need food, you knowing your own needs. So I think in rising, with all that goes on today, we have to continue to give ourselves grace and not judge and seek support and be graceful with others as well as ourselves, right? So when we put out negative energy, we get back negative energy. Put out positive and you will get that, magnified in return. So it's keeping those things in mind as we try to rise to the occasion, and recognizing too that, this too shall pass, right? We will come through a pandemic. It's having that hope, right? And belief that we will come through this pandemic. We will come back to a normal. We won't ever be in the past normal, and to kind of be okay with that. And another piece is to control the controllable, right? There's certain things that we do not have control over. But if we expend energy and time and emotional thought around things we cannot touch, right, or affect, that's draining. So look at what are the small action steps that you can control and feel some comfort and security in that.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it's that draining component that's kind of wearing everyone out.
Yes.
So I'm just curious though, like as we rise through, what do? We look around, we have our mental health kit. We're trying to do everything that we can. We're trying to find that positive, be our biggest, cheerleader and everything. But how do we rise through the pain and the shame of, and be honest, the shame of being an American when you see everything that's going on that's not American, and you try to get to the best version of yourself when people don't allow you to become that best version?
Great question. um, it's about recognizing, again, what we said, like being your best self in that moment, right? Because the best self that you were 3 years ago was a self that existed in a different time and place. So who is the best self that we can be given our current circumstances, right? And sometimes the best self of yesterday is not the best self of today, right? We're still going to try, we're still going to pick it up, and at some point you say the day is over and I'll give it a try tomorrow. Right.
That's all you can do.
All
Thank
you
you.
can do.
So usually, there's probably there's two groups of people in the world, right? There are the people who would appreciate this because, you just help them see what a mental health toolkit is. You just help them start that journey of becoming, that best new version of themselves. Because like you said, the past is the past and we will never go back to that normal. So what does your new normal look like? But then there's another group of people or individuals who, they have it down pat. They know when they're not okay, what they need to do, and they want to give back. So what are some additional support that viewers watching can probably provide Crisis Text Line in regards to their time, talents? How can others help others be okay?
Yes. So Crisis Text Line is powered by its volunteers, people who are supervised by mental health professionals, but the power is in the compassion that's delivered by our volunteers. So anyone who's interested in volunteering can go to crisistextline.org and sign up for a cohort to be trained. And the beauty of our training is it's not just about helping the texter in need, which is important and why we're here, but we also view it as a way of training people to go out in the world and deliver empathy and compassion. Because with our training, it's about listening. It's about identifying people's strengths and highlighting strengths and creating and working through and finding coping strategies, right? So for people who feel like they're in a space to help others, we always welcome new volunteers because there's always another texter who is in need of someone to listen, right? Someone to be there so that they're not alone.
Awesome. And I do want to know, when it comes to the texters that, Crisis Text Line is supporting, how diverse is that population?
So the texters are very diverse. Like I said before, we over-index for African American, Latino, Indigenous, Native American peoples, Asian people. We don't, we have a survey that's voluntary at the end of each conversation, both on the part of the volunteer where it helps us to see kind of what are the issues that people are facing. And then on the side of the texter where we collect, race and ethnicity and other information that's, kept confidential, obviously, and anonymous, but really being able to gather that data has shown us what a resource we are in the Black and Brown and Native American communities.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And again, it's a free service. So, it's anonymous. Anyone is able to utilize the service. I just want to know, in regards to, going back to it's okay to not be okay. And I know we talked about different coping skills in regards to, it's okay to seek a therapist. It's okay to build that mental health kit. If you have someone in your life that you're noticing, you're offering these suggestions to, and they're just not interested, but you can tell that, they're just not in a good place. What can you do to support that individual?
Yeah. That's a great question, because I think sometimes we feel like we have to be clinicians or therapists to talk with our friends and family members when we notice that they are not well, that they are not doing well, that they're struggling in some way. And we do not have to be a therapist to ask, are you okay? You don't seem like yourself. Is there anything I can do? Are you thinking of hurting yourself, right? Sometimes having someone say that takes a weight off and allows someone to just say yes, right? Yes. Then you say, like, I'm here with you. What can we do? Let me find some services, but you're not alone. We call it at Crisis Text Line, it's always ask, right? There's no harm in asking someone if they are not doing well, or if they need help, or if they're trying to hurt themselves, as open-ended questions, right? Not leading with, you're not trying to hurt yourself, are you? Right? That's a question that guides you to a no. But to be open and sit in a space and say, I care about you, I love you, I want to help you, just say yes. Just tell me if you're not okay. And I'm here to stand with you through this. And whatever we need to do, we'll do it together.
Yes, that's really good information, because I think a lot of times when we think about that, you made a good point, having those open-ended questions and not just, those, I don't want to say accusing questions, but like, what's wrong with you? Right. Having that compassion so that
Yeah.
people will open up, and also understanding that it takes time for people to open up to, with everything that's going on, it takes time for them to kind of peel back those layers. But sometimes knowing that someone's there with you while you pull back those layers really does help that, okay, this person is in my corner. And in these times, in these pressing times, we need someone in our corner, either if it's in your community or your workplace. It's a lot of different dynamics going on right now. So that's some really, really good advice on how you can support others.
Yeah, and recognizing too that that depression can masquerade as anger. Mm-hmm. So when you ask and someone responds angrily, don't take it personally, right? Take it as take it as more of an indication that you're right, that they need help, and you try again at a later, in some short time period, but don't be put off by anger, because many times that's a defense mechanism for people who are very sad.
Thank you for that. So I want to go ahead. We have a couple questions lined up, Dr. Turner. So I want to go ahead and ask some of the questions that we have from some of our Googlers.
Great. Thank you.
Awesome. We have one question from George. Dr. Turner, thank you so much for your time. Can you speak to the psychological effects of witnessing abuse, but not necessarily being the direct victim of it?
So that's a great question. That actually, the Adverse Childhood Experiences study has really 10 indicators of abuse, neglect, but included in that is family dysfunction. So the witnessing of a spouse, the witnessing of a parent, a sibling who is being abused is equally as impactful. It counts in the same way as being abused yourself. You cannot discount it, right? So depending on the amount that you witness over what time period, and everybody's affected differently, but it is very fair to say that the witnessing of abuse impacts, especially a child's developing brain, and that the same kind of depression or anxiety that can manifest from experiencing physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse can also occur when you've witnessed it, right? Because it's the empathy, it's the connection between people. Like you know when something's hurting someone else. So watching that creates that same kind of stress and pain response.
Awesome. And Dr. Turner, I was reading more about adverse childhood trauma, and I know when I was reading about the researchers, they say that can also show up in physical elements as well, like later on in your life.
Yes. So really what it is, it's that stress and inflammatory response that it sets off in our bodies. So childhood trauma is equally as impactive on our bodies. So increased risk of heart disease, obesity, autoimmune diseases, lung disease, and then all the things that kind of go along with substance abuse, so liver disease and COPD. So it's all interconnected. It's not just because, again, our mind and our body are connected, right?
Mm-hmm.
So things that we see and that create a stress response, that stress response is throughout our body, right? The inflammatory piece. One of the adverse childhood experiences study looked at people who had no other risk for heart disease besides their trauma, and found that they were at higher risk for a heart attack or stroke than someone who did not have a trauma history, where all else, was equal. The people with the trauma history were at greater risk.
Awesome. Thank you for that. We're ready for the next question. Awesome. In the workplace, when trauma shows up, how would you recommend coworkers communicate that to one another? It can be vulnerable to share, but are courageous conversations necessary in the workplace?
So let's think about, thank you, Chelsea. Let's think about how much time we spend in the workplace, right? We can sometimes spend more time in the workplace than we do with our family, waking hours, than we do with our families. So to not speak to conflict in the workplace, the alternative is you're suppressing it, or you're taking it home and taking it out on someone, dumping it on your family because you can't speak to it in the workplace. So there's more and more of a focus on these courageous conversations. And it's one of the things that we are trying to foster at Crisis Text Line in our cultural transformation. It's about, how do you have a dialogue, right? How do you open up and use your active listening skills and not be defensive and surface assumptions? How do you do those things? Because they are important in the workplace, because otherwise the workplace becomes a stressor on top of just the work, right? But sometimes that means seeking out a third person, in human resources, people operations, to mediate, or a coworker to mediate, but to not have that conversation is long-term will bring stress to you, and ultimately, may cause you to underperform at work, right? So make the workplace environment the best you can. And in the same way you would seek support for personal relationships, seek support for the work relationship, because it's too much time to be spent being angry or unhappy.
No, I agree. And I think, like you said, having those conversations is very important. And just like you need to have that, mental health toolkit for your personal life, you need the same toolkit for your work life. Even if that's your first taste of therapy, is because of workplace. It's my first taste of therapy. I mean, it can be,
because people are people.
Mm-hmm.
People are people. I used to say, but for the people, I could do my job. Right? Because people bring their own, and that's where we have to kind of lean into compassion, right? People bring their own trauma histories to the workplace. They bring their own work trauma to the workplace, right? So when you get an exaggerated response from someone at work, think about, were they triggered by something, right? Can we talk about what triggered that response, because it felt like it was above and beyond what the situation warranted.
I agree. Thank you for that. And next question, please. Awesome. Thank you very much, Dr. Turner and Shaniqua. What are the best ways to approach recovering from trauma, including PTSD and CPTSD, to be able to fully thrive?
Yeah. So post-traumatic stress disorder is very real. And the symptoms can be very debilitating. Anxiety, hyper-responsiveness, just all the stress response that can come from post-traumatic stress. So having experienced a trauma and then carrying that with you. So I would very much say that there's good treatments. There's treatment out there for people who've experienced PTSD. a cognitive behavioral therapy above and beyond what one can get from a mental health toolkit or from talking to a friend. Severe PTSD needs to be treated by someone who's experienced with post-traumatic stress disorder, a therapist, so that you can dig into what that trauma was and really excavate it so that healing can occur. Because I saw you say thriving, right? So to thrive after a long history of trauma and a post-traumatic response to trauma really does require some professional assistance usually.
No, I appreciate that. And I also appreciate you normalizing, not just, surface level resources, but also that it's okay to seek intensive mental health treatment. That's just as okay. Thank you.
Yes.
Next question,
Everybody
please.
needs a good therapist.
Yes. Awesome. What are some ways CTL has had to pivot during the pandemic? Are there learnings that are important for the advancement of mental health industry?
Great question. So CTL's pivoted during the pandemic insofar as we have become a fully remote organization. So everybody is working from home and all that brings, right? We've become very accustomed to and willing to and open to seeing children walk through the background, everything that's happened to everyone else in this workplace environment, this remote work environment. The key that we really try to speak to is being compassionate with everyone and recognizing that people are doing their work as best they can. They've got children at home, there's homeschooling going on, and you just cannot put the same kind of expectations or pressures on people and expect them to perform. And that generally people love their job, they like their job, they like being productive, and it's just about finding that balance. And so at Crisis Text Line, we've had to pivot just like everyone else, but really are mindful when it snows and there's no childcare. Somebody's got to take care of our the children. Let's not forget the children. So we've tried to be a very inclusive environment also for parents and hearing the needs of parents. So a lot of the learnings that we had this year were around ways to support our working parents in the Crisis Text Line organization.
That's awesome. Because I remember I had a baby there, so, and being remote. So I think, Crisis Text Line kind of already had the one up on how to pivot during, a pandemic and having that remote learning. But it's nice to know that, there are additional resources and services that are being provided. That's awesome.
We really did. We focused quite a bit on the benefits to help our staff. I think there was one company that actually does lessons for kids so that we could help with that, downtime, and there could be some virtual lessons for people's children. It's about recognizing you're meeting people where they are so they can do their work.
That's awesome. That's awesome. We have one last question for you, Dr. Turner. How can allies and leaders best support and give space to people, communities in the workplace who are suffering from trauma, particularly acknowledging these affected communities?
So how can allies, leaders best support and give space to people, communities? So it's again, meeting people where they are, right? So when you recognize someone is not okay, reaching out as a leader or as an ally. If you're also referring to BIPOC staff and people of color in the workplace, if you see something that looks like it's a microaggression or is not right, or for our LGBTQ staff, like saying that. So as an ally, when you recognize if someone says something that's off color or just not appropriate, don't leave it to the person of color to have to raise the flag and say, like, this was not right. Like, if you see it's not right, you know, it's to see something, say something, step in on the behalf of that person, so that it gets tiring to always carry that mantle. And if you, as an ally, you step in and you say, you know, that did not sound racially appropriate, or that sounded like it was a microaggression, or did you think about how this might have landed, you know, on a person of color? Do you think about the impact that might have had? To not have to say that yourself every single time means a lot. It means a lot, and it means that people are hearing you in the workplace, and that goes far.
No, I agree 100%. I think that shows a true leader and a true ally to be able and step in and say, you know, that's not okay. You know, not taking me in the corner after it happened and saying, I'm so sorry that happened to you, but actually stepping in and being a voice of reasoning. Exactly, exactly.
Yes.
I really appreciate that one. So I just, to wrap things up, like I said, you know, we came here today to kind of talk about, you know, it's okay to not be okay. We touched on the different complex traumas and things that people can do. And then we also tie that in regards to, you know, still I rise. So in the midst of not being okay, in the midst of a pandemic, in the midst of everything, you know, we're still rising. So what are some things that you would like the audience to take away from today's talk?
So just taking away your mental health toolkit, right? So figure out what it is, figure out when you need it, and don't be afraid to activate it. Reach for it. Give yourself grace and compassion. Do the same for others. Everybody has a story of stress, right? And many, if not all, people have a story of trauma. We don't have to know the story to recognize that we can be there to help, or we can be there in support. Always ask, right? Someone's not doing well. Don't be afraid to reach out. You will not cause someone, the data supports this, you will not cause someone to try to take their own life if you ask if they're thinking about it, right? You actually will show them that you're supporting and seeing them, and that they're not alone. So I think those are the key takeaways. We are in a very unique time as a country, as a people, humanity. So it's so very important that we support each other and give each other grace in this space and time.
No, thank you for that. I couldn't say it any better. And, you know, like I said, between the efforts with Google AI and then the efforts of Google Ads, you know, I'm happy that Google is supporting Crisis Text Line. It's a great organization, not just to, if you need help, of course, if you need help, you can always text 741-741, but also a great opportunity for you to help others, especially in the midst of a pandemic when a lot of volunteer opportunities are no longer available. This is a great way for you to learn empathy, learn skill sets that you can also use with your family and your friends. So again, Dr. Turner, I really appreciate you taking the time to be here.
Thank you, Shaniqua. Thank you, Google. We so appreciate this partnership. And like Shaniqua said, reach out, become a volunteer, reach out for help, plug 741-741 into your phone so that you have it for yourself or for someone you love.
Awesome. Thank you, Dr. Turner, and have a good day. Thanks, everyone.